Hi, it's Bimerzen, and this is a pretty big day for me because in this video I'm going to start the BMW N43 engine for the first time after a pretty big rebuild. So I got this BMW 1 Series with some engine issues, and after I did some diagnosing I found bearing material inside of the oil and the oil filter was totally destroyed. So I decided to pull the engine out of the car and do a full teardown. And after that I found 3 spun bearings on the con rods. So that meant that the engine was pretty much done. And when I was trying to find another good working engine, I realized that they're kind of rare and very expensive. So I've decided to rebuild this engine right here. So here you can see all the parts. I replaced the crankshaft and the con rods, and I replaced all of the gaskets and the chain, and of course the broken chainrail guide. By the way, the cause of this spun bearing situation was a broken chainrail guide, and all of those pieces then clogged the oil pickup, and that led to oil starvation. So word of warning, definitely replace the chainrail guide if your engine is more than 10 years old. Otherwise, you will probably need a new engine if this happens to you. Anyway, it was a lot of work to get to this stage, so I really hope this works. I have plenty of videos on this whole thing, so I have a video on how to diagnose this, I have a video on how to remove transmission, engine, and how to do a teardown. I also have a separate video series on how to rebuild the bottom end, the cylinder head, and how to put everything back together. So here I am. So what I have to do now is fill up the cooling system, add oil, clear the errors, and then cross my fingers and start it for the very first time. So join me, let's go. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fill up the engine with oil, and I'm going to go with 5W40. And that's because the thicker oil is a bit better for the braking process, but I think I will also run this oil long term because it did sustain a lot of damage, and I think it's going to be better for the engine. Slightly more than 4 liters, so perfect. I'm also going to open up the filter, and I'm going to pour some oil directly into the passages. And this way the oil is gonna get into the engine faster. When the oil stops here, I know that the channels are full of oil. Now I'm going to fill up the cooling system, and I'm going to use regular tap water for that, and that's because I want to flush out as much dirt as I can from the rebuild. And after I start the engine and let it run, I'm going to flush out the tap water and replace it with a proper mix of coolant and distilled water. The filling capacity of the whole system is 8.2 liters if you have a manual transmission, and for the automatic transmission is 8.4. But first I just want to fill it to the max level. It's making funny noises. I'm also going to unscrew the plug on the oil cooler to help the air escape. Now I can add more water. Indicator is on the max level, and now I can close the plug. Now I'm inside of the car, and I'm going to insert the key. And I'm going to set the heating to max and the ventilation to minimum. Not off, but minimum. And I'm also going to turn on the AC. And this will open up the solenoids and allow the water to get into the cabin heater. Now I'm going to activate the electronic water pump, and the car has a special bleeding procedure that you can activate by pressing the gas pedal after start for 10 seconds. And it started. And I'm also going to turn on the headlights so that the car doesn't go into sleep mode. I have the battery connected to a charger so I don't run out of juice. This procedure usually takes about 10 minutes, so just be patient. Okay, let's check the results, and oh yeah, there is some nastiness down there. I'm gonna add some water so that the oily residue is gonna flow to the top. I'm going to repeat the procedure, but this time with the water all the way to the top, and I hope that this time the nastiness is gonna gather on top and I will be able to remove it. This is working quite nicely, so the foam is purging out of the system. Here's the final result. The second cycle is much cleaner. Now I have my cable connected to the OBD port and my laptop running with INPA. And now I'm going to go into the E87 menu and engine and select MSD80. So this is for the N43. And I'm going to go to the menu F4, which is for errors. And I'm going to delete errors. So F5. Okay. Okay, let's check again. And there are no errors at the moment. I'm going to leave the expansion tank open and I'm going to run the engine for 1 minute, and then I'm going to shut it down and add more coolant, or water to be more precise. And after that I'm going to start the engine again and run it at about 2000 to 3000 RPMs. And that's because I want to build up oil pressure to wash out all of the debris from the bearings. And this is according to MAHLE specification. So you're not supposed to idle the engine after a rebuild because there's not enough oil flow to wash off all of the debris. And also the cylinder walls don't get enough oil spray, so that means that the debris is not washed off and also the cooling is a bit worse. So yeah, it's not a very good idea to just idle the engine after a rebuild. Okay, I'm getting quite nervous, but I think it's time I start the engine. It runs! It's alive! After 1 minute of running, I still don't have to add any coolant, so I'm just going to leave it like this. I'm going to do a quick check of the high pressure fuel lines, if I have any leaks anywhere. And so far everything looks perfect. I can't see or feel or smell any leaks. Okay. I'm going to start the engine again and run it for 5 minutes at about 2000 RPM. I got a warning light for the oil, and I added some oil and now the error is gone. So I guess it was this warning light right here, which is a good thing, I guess. This is a bad warning light because this is oil pressure and this is just oil level. So I guess when I was rebuilding the engine was totally dry and it accepts more oil than specified, because I put in 4.2 liters of oil approximately, and now it's 5 liters of oil. Yeah, let's see if we can check the oil level now. I guess it's still warming up, so I'll have to wait. Okay, let's check again. So up button. I go to oil and then I press BC, and here's a nice oil level. So this is what 5 liters of oil will get you after an engine rebuild. I run the engine up to temperature, and if I check the temperature of the outlet hose, it's nice and warm, so I know that the thermostat opened. However, the level is still too high, so I'm going to remove some of the water with the syringe. This is the max level, so now I can put back the cap. Now I just have to finish up by installing the support struts and the engine cover, and also the cabin filter housing and the front duct. If you're interested in the details, you can check out my video on the intake manifold installation. I'm going to put the link down in the description and up in the card. And I can't really believe it, but after all this work, I can finally go on a test drive. Well, that's a problem I didn't know that existed. Attempt number 2. Oh yeah, that worked. And I'm back from the test drive, and I'm happy to report that it went well. So no major issues to report. The engine runs nice and smoothly, and also the idle is very smooth. I'm kind of surprised about that. And it pulls quite well for such a small power level engine. On my first drive, I did about 25 kilometers on the local roads, and the speeds were between 50 and 90 kilometers an hour, which is perfect for the braking in period. I definitely don't want to push the engine too much in the beginning. On my second drive, I did about 15 kilometers, and when I got back, I got a low oil level warning. And when I've checked the menu on the dashboard, the level was at a minimum, so I had to add half a liter of oil. And I guess that's kind of normal for the engine after a rebuild. I've let the engine cool down a little bit, so now I can check the coolant level again. And as expected, it is below minimum, so I guess there was still a little bit of air trapped inside of the engine, but nothing too major. Still plenty of coolant here. Now I'm going to drain the regular tap water from the system, and I'm going to refill it with the proper mix of coolant and distilled water. This is what came out, a slightly greenish liquid. No major signs of any debris or dirt, so I guess that's good. I'm going to use the G11 specification of the coolant. This is the blue one, and I'm going to mix it a bit stronger than usual, and that's because I still have a little bit of normal tap water in the system. So I'm going to mix it 50-50, and I think it's gonna come out as a 40-60, which is good for minus 24 centigrade, which is okay for the climate that I live in. And now I can reinstall the plug. As I've said before, the best way to do this is by using vacuum. There are special tools that can evacuate air out of the system, and then you open up a valve and you let the coolant in, and that will fill up the voids. However, obviously I don't have those tools, so I'm just going to do it the good old-fashioned way. I don't even have a funnel. Once again, I'm going to open up this bleeding plug and let the air escape. You can hear it escaping. And I'm going to add more coolant now. The coolant started leaking out of the plug, so I'm going to close it off. The coolant is all the way to the top, so now I can rerun the electric water pump bleeding procedure. And this time I'm going to show you how to trigger this procedure with INPA. I'm going to go into Steuern, and I have to go into F8 menu for the Wasserpumpe, which is water pump. And now I have to select F5 for the Kühlsystemlüftung, which means cooling system bleeding. So F5 and then F1 for start. And here it says that you should not stop this procedure. And this is where you have to confirm that you have this system set up. So heat max, AC on, and the heater to the minimum. I can confirm. And here it goes. So here are all the cycles. And here you can see the duration of each cycle. The water pump is doing its thing, so I just have to be careful to add more coolant if it goes below minimum level. And I think it's done. Now I'm going to start the engine and run it for a couple of minutes. And while the engine is running, I'm also going to record sound at the different locations around the engine. And this way I'm going to get good baseline sound signature. And if later I get paranoid or I get any weird noises, I can always refer back to this recording and see if it's normal or there's something going on with the engine. And this weird noise is actually the purge solenoid for the fuel tank. So this noise is definitely not a problem. It actually just stopped. I've been driving the car for 300 kilometers and unfortunately I just got check engine light. So I guess let's check the errors. This means that the oil pressure is low. That's an error I didn't want to see. Oh my god, another error I didn't want to see. Catalytic converter underperforming. Okay, another error for the catalytic converter. And yet another error I really did not want to see. Gemischregelung. So this is the mixture control. Gemisch to fit. That means that it's running too rich. Let's go into the freeze frame. So here are the values when this error happened. So this was cold start, it looks like. 15 degrees, 11 degrees here again. Yeah, I'm not too sure what's going on here because I did reuse the original oil pressure solenoid and it could be getting stuck or maybe it's leaking, I'm not sure. Let's continue. So this is the error number 2, 2826, error number 3. I'm not really sure how to interpret this data. So this is the important freeze frame. I can see that both lambda probes are on, so the engine is working in closed loop. And here I can see the lambda adaptation and integrator. And it's very low, so it tries to reduce the fuel mixture and it's unsuccessful. It goes up to 25% and then it just throws error. I can also see that the fuel consumption is quite high. It should be maybe 1 liter less than this, 7.5, something like that, based on the driving regime at the moment. Unfortunately, this could be quite a common symptom of leaking injectors. So yeah, I'm worried about that. To be honest, I'm not too sure what to do. So I'm going to reset the errors, get some fresh fuel and run the car for 50 kilometers on the highway and see if the error comes back. I'm also going to do one oil change and check how much bearing material or debris is inside of the oil and inside of the oil filter. First, I'm just going to crack the filter open so that the remaining oil from the oil filter housing can drain back into the oil sump. Okay, let's remove the filter and see how many particles we have in there. So far, nothing too worrying. And I can already see some copper shavings on the top. Let's see what we have here. Yeah, there's definitely some dirt here. Oh yeah, here's a big one. So that just shows you how hard it is to clean the engine after the bearing material gets inside of the oil. Yeah, oh my god, so much cleaning and still so much bearing material in here. Well, I hope that the filter did its job. I'm going to use new filter. I'm going to jump into the future because I'm really interested in how much metal particles there are in the oil after long-term use. And if there are less metal particles in the oil and in the filter, then that means that the rebuild was a success, so no further damage is being done to the engine. And on the other hand, if there will be more metal particles in the oil, then I know that the rebuild was a failure. I've done 2000 kilometers with the car. Now it's time for the second oil change since the rebuild. Let's check the oil filter. And yeah, I can still see a little bit of copper particles. Let's check the inside. Yeah, there is still some pieces in here. It's definitely much better than the first oil change. I guess this is the biggest piece I could find in the filter. The oil is a bit black, but I can't see any signs of any metal particles. Let's check for any residue. Nope, it's perfectly clean. No particles in the oil. And based on this, I can conclude that the rebuild was a success and all of those trapped particles in the oil filter are from oil cooler, and probably some of them were still in the system because it's almost impossible to clean it out completely. But anyway, I'm pretty satisfied with this result. And now the refill with a proper specification of the oil, 5W40 and BMW's long life 04 specification. I will be using this fancy 3D printed funnel. And of course I have to add 4.3 liters of oil. Yeah, this thing really makes the oil fill up much easier. Nice and clean. Okay, now back to the present. Unfortunately, all of the errors came back after I drove the car for a while, and I still have all of the errors for the catalytic converter fuel mixture. I also had some misfires on some cylinders, and also the low oil pressure warning or error code came back. So yeah, there are still some issues to resolve here. And so in my next video, I'm going to go through what I call injector hell, and I'm going to be diagnosing and replacing bad injectors. I'm also going to talk about how to diagnose issues with injectors in INPA and how to do the adaptations on this engine. It's quite complicated and I think it's gonna be a very good video for you guys. And I'm also going to make a video on how to diagnose and fix the low oil pressure warning or error code. So that's also gonna be quite interesting and informative. So if you find this content useful, give it a like, consider subscribing to my channel. Keep zen and continue the art of BMW maintenance.